What's up, everybody? Jackson Fuller here, and you are listening to a new episode of Hoggin the Mic. Andrew Hutchinson will join us in a moment. Glad to be back talking the Hogs here with Hutch. And we got a lot to discuss. We've had a full week of fall camp, and Hutch and I just got back from a press conference with Arkansas football coach Sam Pittman, recapping the first scrimmage of the fall. We didn't get to see anything. We got to take everything we're told with a grain of salt, but I do think there were some interesting takeaways based off what Sam told us and also what an Arkansas spokesperson told us of actually happening on the field. So should be a fun month, I think, of coming up to kind of get excited and push away that dread of the football season. We'll try and do that for you guys with, of course, a lot of honesty sprinkled in. Let's bring Hutch in, play that rock music, and get the latest episode of Hoggin the Mic on the way. All right, Hutch. How are you feeling through 1 week of camp? Not about the Arkansas football team, just emotionally. Are you ready for football season and those long Saturdays and the Mondays and Tuesdays where we're wondering who's injured and everything? Are you ready for football season yet?
I think having this full week of practice under our belts has really kind of gotten me into football mode because I'm going to be honest, when fall camp started, I was still stuck in baseball mode. I was very much more interested in kind of what Dave Van Horn was doing with his roster and things like that. But after a week of football practice, I think I've gotten back into football mode, and I'm very much looking forward to having some real games to talk about other than just practice.
Absolutely. I got to be honest. I've snapped into football mode pretty quickly after the baseball season. I don't know, but I think that might be I'm a little bit more optimistic on the Razorbacks than most people, and that's not really saying much. We can get into that maybe at a later podcast with our season expectations. Probably a little too early to give any predictions right now. But let's jump into this first week of camp and let's start with the scrimmage. What from based off what we heard from Sam and what we heard from the Arkansas side of things of what happened on the field. What was your biggest revelation, takeaway, just something that made you think, that's the most interesting thing to come out of the scrimmage?
Well, I was really pleased to hear about Isaiah Satania having, a big day. Apparently, we were told he caught a 45-yard pass on the first play of the scrimmage. He later added a 65-yard touchdown, had another 20-yard catch. I mean, that right there and those three catches alone is 130 yards. So that's notable because Tyrone Broden and Andrew Armstrong were both held out because of injuries. Neither one of the injuries seemed to be serious. They should be fine. So given that, it was good to see Isaiah Satania as kind of like the lone starter left, kind of step up into that alpha role. Very much pleased to hear that because I think he's capable of that. I think he's capable of having a big year. We just haven't ever really seen it yet. We saw flashes last year, but to hear he did that in this scrimmage, I think was really encouraging for the offense.
Yeah, and I will be honest. I've been someone that's been a little bit hesitant to anoint Isaiah Satania. We've had these discussions, not on this podcast, but at practice. I don't. I'm just unsure about him as a true impact player for this team. I think there was a lot of hype last season about him, and it never materialized. I've loved what I've seen from Tyrone Broden and Andrew Armstrong. Just like anybody that's gone to these practices, I think that's unanimous amongst us as the media or coaches or just guess that those two receivers look incredible. But it's starting to become unavoidable for me that there's some buzz with Satania growing. He seems to have really locked down that starting slot receiver position, and it seems like the lights are clicking on for him. I mean, he was in a press conference with us the other day, and he wasn't crass or mean or anything, but very short and to the point with his answers. It felt like he meant all business. He knew this was a big year. He didn't necessarily, want to talk about it too much. Just kind of wants to let his play do the talking, maybe. And I do think it's great to hear that because if Broden and Armstrong are as good as we think they could be, I mean, having that third guy is going to unlock them even more so, and them being better is going to, on the flip side, unlock the potential for the slot receivers as well. So I'm right there with you on Satania. I think my biggest thing, based off what we heard today, is just there wasn't it sounds like the defense got the best of the offense at the end of the scrimmage, but it's nice to just hear that the offense had its moments without Armstrong, without Broden, with Patrick Kudus, the left guard, sidelined. That they were still able to produce and have some big plays. It sounds like Taylor Green had a pretty good scrimmage. Malachi Singleton had a great scrimmage. That's not something we really heard, I think, last year coming out of the scrimmage. I think a lot of Sam's frustrations and question marks coming out of some of the scrimmages last year was about the offensive line play, and just it was like he spun it as, hey, the defensive line is dominating. But I think at the end of the day, that spoke more about the offensive line than the defensive line. What have you kind of we're reading the tea leaves, and based off what you've seen, how do you feel, and how do you think Arkansas feels about the offensive line room right now?
I think they feel really good, especially if Patrick Kudus can come back. Which he's dealing with a little bit of a back issue. Sam Pittman said today that they expect him to be back. I may be slightly less optimistic than them in that he's an offensive lineman dealing with a back issue. That's usually not a good combination. But if he can get healthy, like they say he can, I think that the offensive line is going to be vastly improved. Probably a low bar to clear there, but I think that it's in pretty good shape. I think they really like what they have from Fernando Carmona at left tackle. And it seems like Addison Nichols is a guy that's flexible enough to where if Kudus is out, maybe he can slide over to guard, and you have Amari Wiggins play center. It sounds like they feel better about that offensive line at this point this year compared to last year. So I think it's going to be better, but again, probably need to see it in a real game to know for sure.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I'm a little nervous about the offensive line. I think one thing that I was kind of writing a lot during the summer was it can't get any worse, and also an expectation that it is going to be significantly better. But I'm nervous about this Patrick Kudus injury. I'm nervous about what I've seen just from that group. It feels like they might have six guys that they trust, and that those six guys could form an average offensive line in the SEC, which would be a huge, huge step up from where they were last year. But we're already seeing it. Injuries are going to happen. There's going to be a game this year in the SEC, I think, where Arkansas is going to have to play two offensive linemen that aren't part of that core starting five. I mean, maybe not. Maybe they get a healthy season, and that's you put your hands up and say thank you to the gods, and we did it. We got through with a healthy season in our offensive line. We got to play the best five guys. The likelihood of that happening, I think, is very small. And what I'm seeing right now from fall camp is that there's a significant gap between those top 5, 6 and the rest of the group. And that gives me concern that maybe it'll be better in spurts, but at the end of the day, that there could be some weeks this year where, pass protection, running the ball is just as difficult as it was last year based off the offensive line. And I guess that's where Bobby Petrino comes in, and you hope the scheme and so much better and so much less rigid than what it was under Dan Enos, that makes a huge impact with the offense.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, a guy that really comes to mind when you talk about like that depth is like Tykees Crawford. And this is a 4-star recruit that was super heralded and looks the part. You'll watch him in practice. He'll dominate a guy on a rep. But it just, for some reason, the light hasn't come on for him. I don't know if it's playbook or what. But he's got it for 4 years now. They've been talking about him as a potential starter, and it just hasn't happened. So, and honestly, it's kind of telling that he's remained with the second unit even with Kudus out. They're bringing up Amari Wiggins instead of him. So, to me, that tells me a lot, and if he's not able to push, we haven't really heard anything about Amarian Harris. He was a heralded recruit. He's still, your backup left tackle. Maybe Joe Moore, the transfer from Syracuse. He dealt with injuries last year. If he's healthy, maybe he could potentially push Blackstock for that starting right tackle spot, or at least be there as a suitable backup if needed. But yeah, there are definitely depth concerns at that spot, as well as a few others on the team.
There are depth concerns at I think a lot of spots on the team, and Sam hasn't shied away from that. I think he admitted multiple times, like, I feel good about our starters, but we got to figure out who the backups are, and that's what the scrimmages are for. Man, it'd be really nice if we could watch some of the scrimmages and get a little, an unbiased look at see how the backups are actually doing. But I get it. That's just not the way it works these days in SEC college football. Quarterbacks, I think it's weird where there's not a whole lot of talk about Taylon Green right now at fall camp. Maybe I'm missing it, but I mean, personally, I'm gonna have a story about him up tomorrow. But I kind of realized, like, since speaking with him today and hearing Sam talk about him, like, there's not a lot of buzz, I think, with Taylon Green, and you could take that two ways. Like, maybe that's a good thing that there's not a lot of buzz, that Arkansas feels confident about what he's doing, and hey, there is no quarterback competition that we all kind of expected when KJ Jefferson left and Green came in. We thought it would be more of an open competition, and that never happened. Or maybe there's a lack of buzz because he's not creating those flash plays. And I think that answer is less likely than the first. But what have you made of Taylon through what we've seen so far of fall camp?
I mean, I think he's been fine. Again, nothing super flashy, but I think part of that also is the fact that it's fall camp and you can't touch the quarterbacks. You're not going to run. I mean, apparently he had a 37-yard touchdown run in the scrimmage today, but who knows if it was actually legitimate or not? Because the defense can't touch them. So I think he's been fine. I'm still, I like what they have as a starting group of receivers. I like what they have at tight end. My thing is can Taylon get them the ball accurately? I think that's maybe the biggest question to me. You look back at his completion percentages at Boise; they're in the 50s. You need that to be a lot higher in the SEC. So I've got maybe accuracy concerns. I think he's got a strong arm, and I think he's super athletic. He's tall. He's obviously a great leader based on everything we've heard from the team. So those are all good qualities to have as a quarterback. But at the end of the day, you've got to be able to put the ball where your receiver can catch it. And that's probably not going to be something we know is 100% answered until, a couple of weeks into the season. Because there were times this spring when we got to watch more where there were days where he looked really good and was really accurate, but then there were other days where it was a little iffy. So has he improved that with all the footwork and technique stuff with Bobby Petrino? That remains to be seen in my book.
I think that's a good call. We're kind of in a wait and see mode with Taylon Green, and a lot of that I think does have to do with the running aspect of it. Like, if this was full-fledged tackling, and he ripped off an 80-yard touchdown run, where we got to see that 30-yard touchdown run in the scrimmage, like, maybe then the buzz starts to get a little louder. And I think when I think about this offense, the offensive line is the first thing that comes to my mind, no matter what. I think that's the starting point for the run game. It's the starting point for the pass game, letting the receivers get open, for Taylon Green having time. So that's the start. But the next step for me when it comes to being optimistic about this offense being better is Taylon Green as a runner. And KJ was a terrific runner, right? But we didn't really get to see that as much last year, and that was because of the offensive line. So if this offensive line can be better, and that allows Taylon Green to use his legs in a Bobby Petrino scheme, because Dan Enos was never an offensive coordinator that loved to highlight a running physical quarterback. He had to with KJ, and he did his best, which amounted to a midseason firing and a 4-8 season. So it was definitely something I think that was taken away from the Arkansas offense last year, and having that dual threat capabilities of Taylon is something he has to be an elite running quarterback for this team to reach whatever goals it wants to this season.
Exactly, and I think that also would help. If his threat of running, that opens up the passing game. That also opens up things for the other running backs. Which Rashad Dubinion and Jaquindon Jackson both missed the scrimmage today, so can't really look too much into that. But I mean, the run game itself needs to be better too. I mean, you look back at last year. I mean, I think the other day, me and you and some of the other reporters were looking over the rushing stats from last year, and it was just like, golly, they were terrible. So hopefully that can be better as well. And I think, Taylon running the ball is going to be part of that as well.
Absolutely. Who are some players that you've seen through fall camp so far that, maybe or not a Taylor Green, not a Landon Jackson, Cam Ball. Let's some of the not so household names that you've been impressed with and you think are going to make an impact for Arkansas this year.
Yeah, I think let's go to the defensive side. We know Jalen Braxton. He had a really good freshman campaign. I'm still excited about him. I think he's going to be their top corner. But honestly, when they've been healthy and full speed, I think Keon Stewart and Jaheim Singletary have both been improved. In their second year in the system. I don't know if they're going to be locked, sure thing, starting cornerbacks. I know you're really high on Selwyn Bridges, the freshman, but I think those guys are 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 improved, which they struggled at times. We think we all remember Jaheim Singletary's rough outing against LSU. But if he's healthy, I know he's dealing with a little bit of an injury right now. I can't remember what it was, an ankle or something. Uh, he is a guy that I think could still be productive. And I'll be honest, I was very skeptical of Keon Stewart. I thought, I wasn't sure why they brought him back, as a sixth-year senior and everything. But he seems to be improved as well, and I think he's going to help them on the defensive side. So those two guys kind of jump out at me as guys that have improved tremendously over last year.
Yeah, Jaheim is a guy. You bring up the LSU game, and I think it's just funny how context gets lost, right? Like over time, and um, I mean, think about on the road against the Heisman winning quarterback and two first round NFL receivers. Like that, and like cornerbacks are going to have bad games there. And look, I mean, playing in the SEC, he's going to go up against offenses with similar levels of talent this year. So it's not like a super rare occurrence to go up against a team with that much talent at wide receiver, but I think that there's some obvious reasons why Jaheim struggled in that game and last year. I mean, you and I were sitting there in the media room the other day and kind of like, yeah, he arrived in the summer. So did Keon. Like there was, it kind of makes sense that McGlothern and Braxton were the top two guys last year when the Stewart and Singletary just got to campus so late and had such minimal time to kind of get comfortable with things. Um, I'm high on Selman Bridges, but I think he might be a year away. But I wouldn't be surprised at all if he works his way as a starter at some point this season. You know, I don't think it'll be the same type of quick trajectory that Braxton had last year, but Selman just looks like an NFL cornerback out there. I mean, Coach Duron Wilson said the same thing, comparing him to kind of the Legion of Boom in Seattle, and it's a matter of time before he's making an impact at Arkansas, whether that's this year or next year, as long as he sticks around, of course, with the transfer portal. One of the guys that I think we've talked about a little bit as another surprise impact guy is Marquise Gums. I mean, he continues to look good to me, and I didn't think he looked good in the spring, and we weren't seeing Ty Washington at the same time. So I still had Ty ahead of Marquise, and I was just like, oh, he looks good, but he's still the third tight end. I think there's a world where Marquise is more like the second tight end this year than the third tight end. But, with Luke has his injury history, he, had the injury last year. Sam told us today he's dealing with a concussion. You're going to need all those guys. What have you made of Ty Washington and Marquise Gums? Do you have one of those two that maybe you think is a little bit ahead in the competition to be Luke's backup right now?
Man, I like both of those guys, to be honest. I really like that tight end room. I mean, Luke is obviously number one, but, what we saw from Ty Washington last year in a real game was really impressive. And Marquise, seeing how much he's improved, I mean, it seemed like a light bulb came on for him this spring. Like and not only was he not productive during the season, but even before the season, like during fall camp last year, I don't remember him making a single play where I'm like, oh wow, there's the heralded tight end. I didn't see it. And this spring and even this fall, we've seen that a lot more, quite frequently, honestly. So I like both those guys. I don't know who's ahead of the other, but I will say I have liked all the talk. I mean, it may just be talk because it's still talking season. We haven't played a real game or anything, but they keep talking about they're going to run out there with some 12 personnel. There's even talk of 13 personnel. And I think with the tight ends that you got, it's certainly something you can do. And I mean, Bobby Petrino knows how to use a tight end. We all remember DJ Williams at Arkansas when he was here. He had think, oh, who was the other tight end they had that was from Warren? I think Chris Gregg was a tight end at Arkansas, that the one from that group. So I mean, he was really talented. They utilized him a lot. So I think that they're going to use all those guys, especially if the depth at wide receiver isn't as good. Kind of, we don't think it's that great. If they got top three receivers, maybe they need to, instead of trotting out a fourth receiver to give one of those guys a break, you go into 12 personnel or something like that. So I really like that tight end group.
Yeah. One thing, just real quick off that, very encouraging, I think, today to hear more praise for Davion Dozier. He's a guy that in the fall or in the spring made some unbelievable catches, had some unbelievable practices, and then he has a knack for kind of going unnoticed at times. This fall hasn't been anything spectacular. He made a great one-handed catch on Saturday, but he's been working primarily with the twos and the threes. I imagine today he probably I don't know. I would guess he did a little bit of work with the ones since Broden and Armstrong are out, but I don't know for sure. If he, I think out of all the wide receivers that they have, like behind Armstrong, Broden, and Satenya, he's the guy with the highest ceiling, and it would be great to get him out there and just see what he's got in the SEC this year. But I'm with you. It feels like if you've got three terrific tight ends, try and find a way to use them all as much as possible, and that probably includes getting them out on the field together. And hey, if you do that and they're all capable of blocking, you can do some really exciting. You can control the running game with play action and everything. It's just a huge added layer to the offense but those guys have to be able to block, which I think last year the entire everybody on the team struggled with blocking. It wasn't just an offensive line issue. It was the running backs. It was the tight ends as well. So what's your biggest concern? Maybe we've already talked about it a little bit. Mine's the offensive line, but with this team, what's your biggest concern right now, whether that's a specific position or I don't know, a weakness maybe in terms of, like we just talked about, the depth. What's your biggest concern for Arkansas right now?
I think it's just depth in general, because we talked about it on the offensive line, talked about it at receiver. I'm still waiting to see kind of how this, the secondary shakes out. I mean, I mentioned how I've liked what Keon Stewart and Jaheim Singletary have done and improvements and stuff, but it's safety. You've still got Jaden Johnson and Hudson Clark, who I think those are fine players, but I don't think they've really been pushed by the guys, behind them. I mean, Sam Pittman even said, they like what they have in the ones and the twos there, but they don't have much beyond that. And that's a little bit scary, especially for those of us who were around a couple of years ago when there were like 13,000 injuries in the secondary. You need some depth there, and I think TJ Metcalf, could be a guy that helps at safety. Still curious to see what's going on with Miguel Mitchell. For the first part of fall camp, we saw him working with the threes behind a true freshman, Akari Johnson. That was a little bit weird. I think Miguel Mitchell started getting some more reps with the twos lately. That's probably someone we needed to ask Sam Pittman about, but we forgot about. There's just depth in general. I think injuries have a chance to be devastating, just like we've seen in the past. I mean, even a couple of years ago, I mentioned the secondary injuries. I mean, KJ Jefferson was banged up, Rocket Sanders banged up, and it just, those injuries can hurt Arkansas more than they would a place like Georgia or Alabama or something where you've got plenty of quality depth. And that to me is the number one thing I'm worried about entering the season.
Yeah, and I think for all the good that we're hearing about, the leadership and everything like that, we heard similar things last year. We hear that every fall when it's talking season, right? My biggest concern for this team, and this isn't necessarily a fall camp thing, but it's just the early season, and how do they get through that Oklahoma State game? Honestly, I mean, it's that game, it's Texas A&M, it's Auburn, but like if they come out on the other side of the Oklahoma State game with a loss, how do they respond? Or is it, oh gosh, here we go again? Because then you got to go on the road to Auburn, you've got to play Texas A&M in Dallas, which is technically a road game this year, I think, but the neutral site and everything. So I'm concerned about the mindset of this team and this program right now. There's a lot of pressure on it, and I think they're doing a good job of hiding it, but I do think that they feel it in a lot of ways too. And I think Landon kind of has spoken about he wanted to come back and right things. Keon Stewart said that he wanted to come back because last year was unacceptable, more so on an individual level, I think, than a team level. But still, if you're good as an individual, the team's is better. So they all feel like they have to be better this year. What happens early on this season if it doesn't go according to plan, and how do they respond? Because the season's going to go by in a flash, but it's a long road. You can start out the season 2-3 and win a couple of those home games and pull off upsets, and all of a sudden the start isn't as bad as you thought it was. But I think we're all kind of in agreement that they've got to come away with at least 3 wins in those first 5 games, right, Hutch?
Yeah, I mean that Oklahoma State game is probably the most important game of the Sam Pittman era because it'll determine the direction of the season. They could easily let go of the rope. We saw last year what happened when they let go of the rope. After they got that Florida win, and then Auburn and Missouri were just embarrassments, to be quite honest. So they definitely need to show some more mental fortitude. And if they do lose that Oklahoma State game, how do they avoid it being just a 1-4 start or something like that? Because then things could spiral.
Yeah. The running backs room, I think it hasn't gotten a lot of talk because there's a lot of trust in those first 2 guys in Jaquindon Jackson and Rashad Dominion. But neither of those guys played today at the scrimmage, so we had a lot of Braylon Russell talk from Sam Pittman. Is this a sneaky position that we should be more concerned about, just with the depth there and what they've got? Or, do you have faith that maybe, if Jaquindon's not as healthy or goes through some injuries or whatever it may be, that, R-Dub, Braylon Russell, Rodney Hill, Tyrell Reed are good enough?
I think they like what they have, but I think the potential is so much higher if Jaquindon Jackson is fully healthy. I mean, just based on everything I've seen, he looks like a really good running back, and I think he's due for a big year if he can stay healthy. Now, it'd be cool to see Braylon Russell get like a heavy workload as a freshman because we know, okay, this guy is legit, or maybe he's not the 4-star guy he was made up to be. So that would be cool, especially with him being an in-state kid. But I'm a little bit more skeptical on the Rodney Hill, being a guy. He's showed some flashes at Florida State, but he was going to go to Florida A&M. Then he came here. JUCO guys typically haven't been kind to Sam Pittman over the last few years. So I'm skeptical. Seen some decent things from them in camp, but yeah, I think Jaquindon being healthy is huge. Even Rashad Dominion, he showed some flashes as a freshman. It was okay. Last year, not so good, but he's a guy in preseason that has looked really good and been like, okay, this guy's got a lot of potential. We just, again, haven't seen it on the field. I just feel better if Jaquindon Jackson is healthy.
Yeah, I guess I asked that question because I was thinking about it today, noticing that, okay, so no Jaquindon, no R-Dub at the scrimmage, and it's a lot of Braylon Russell, and I think Tyrell Reed had a big catch, but we didn't really hear anything from Rodney Hill, and the room is a lot worse than it was last year, right? Like, I mean, Rocket had his issues and his injuries, and the offensive line was bad, but I mean, last year you went into the season with Rocket, R-Dub, AJ Green, and Dominique Johnson, and then you had Isaiah Augustave as like a top 300 recruit coming in, and this year, like, I mean, do you like past those top 2? It just feels like it just feels like a much bigger question mark maybe than it was last year, and you're right though, that question is answered if Jaquindon Jackson is healthy and can play 10, 11, hopefully 12 games this year. But if he's not, then it takes on a huge I think it becomes a huge weakness for this team. last thing, Hutch, and then we'll wrap up. We wanted to keep this kind of quick, and of course, there's only so much you can talk about when it's fall camp, and we only get 15 minutes of practice. But I'm wondering, on a personal level, for you, watching Bobby Petrino as a coach, yelling at players, running RPO drills, teaching the footwork and everything. Just what's it like for you? What do you think it's been like for the state of Arkansas right now, just having Petrino back in the fold? And it seems like it's a honeymoon period, but at the same time, there's a lot of optimism that this could be a huge boost for the program.
Well, for me personally, I was a senior in high school when he had his motorcycle accident and got fired and all that. And so I just missed, being able to cover that Bobby Vitrino era. I was so looking forward to, one, being a student, going to the student section, with Arkansas as a top 10 team and all that kind of stuff. And, all I was rewarded with was ULM and 52-0 beat down by Alabama. And it was just a disaster. And that was also about the time I started my sports writing career, with the Arkansas Traveler, and I got to cover John L. Smith instead. Second press conference I ever covered was the infamous Smile press conference. So I missed out on the Bobby Petrino, and I always heard stories, from the other sports writers who were around during that era, tell their Bobby Petrino stories, and so that was a little bit disappointing that I missed out on that. But now, hey, I get to see it. He's not the head coach, but I get to see it, as an offensive coordinator. And we have seen a little bit. You got after Jaden Wilson a few practices ago. That was pretty entertaining to see. And it's a little bit toned down based on what I've seen, but still a Bobby Petrino experience. So it's cool for me, and I think it's also really cool for the state, because the last time Arkansas was great, they won 9 games a few years ago, and they were a really good team. But when they were great and they were a legitimate national title contender, Bobby Petrino is at the helm. So I think that gives fans a little bit of confidence that, hey, our guy's back. He's going to lead us to the promised land. That optimism is there. Without Bobby Petrino, that optimism might not exist, and then there'd be even less interest in the football team than there is right now.
Yeah, I asked that just as when he got hired here. I think I was kind of not the pessimist, but I was just throwing a little bit of cold water on it, and I've not completely turned around on it. I'm still let's in a wait and see mode of how real is this impact going to be. But I do think I've come around a little bit on just like what I've seen them doing in practice. The spring was kind of very enlightening of just, hey, this offense, it's not perfect, but it's creating a lot more holes and separation than anything we ever saw under Enos. And I think it means something to the state that he's back. And I think a lot of people are saying that he's the coach in waiting, and I really kind of I don't like that very much. I think it's disrespectful a little bit to Sam and even to Hunter Yurachek. But for say what you want, Bobby could have easily have turned this down. Like he didn't have to come back here. I think he felt an obligation and to try and right some of his wrongs, but at the same time, like, he has so much pride in this program that he wants to be a part of fixing it. Whether that gets done under Sam, I think a lot of people think that it's not going to happen this year, but Petrino's now a part of the equation where if it doesn't get fixed, he's part of that blame. But I do think it's cool that he's back here, and as an offensive coordinator and a quarterbacks coach, he's not the head guy. He's not getting all the spotlight. He probably enjoys that more, not having to talk to us every day after practice. So I just wanted to get my thoughts in there as someone that his only Bobby Petrino Arkansas memory is that photo of him in the neck brace. So I don't come into this with a lot of history, but it's cool to see that history kind of make a reappearance here, and see just how much he's coming to a 4-8 program. I think they're not on top. He's trying to be a part of the rebuild. So any final thoughts, Hutch, from you on fall camp? Anything that I missed that you think we absolutely need to mention before we log off for the day?
Well, I guess we got to give some love to the kickers, right? I mean, it sounds like that was a major storyline from today. The spring did not go well for the kickers. Both Matthew Shipley, the Hawaii transfer, and Vito Calvaruso, who transferred away and then came back, both of those guys were super inconsistent during the spring, especially in the stadium, which seems problematic to me. But the kickers had a good day today. Vito, I guess, is dealing with a little bit of an injury, so he didn't kick. But Matthew Shipley, I think, made like 3 of 4 field goals, including a 51-yarder to cap a 2-minute drill. That Sam Pittman made a big deal about. You could just tell how happy Sam Pittman was for Matthew Shipley in the press conference. And then also, Kyle Ramsey, the FCS transfer, made a couple of field goals. And then also they have got another freshman walk-on that made a 42-yard field goal, so nothing to scoff at there. So really good showing by the kickers today. And Sam Pittman also went out of his way to give Devin Bale a lot of love as the punter. So good. Sounds like it was a good day for special teams, which was good to hear after it was a little bit iffy during the spring.
Yeah, and if Matthew, it's not going to be Cam Little type production and efficiency, but if Matthew Shipley can make 3 out of 4 kicks and make the occasional 50-yarder, 75% with a few 50-yarders, I think that's a good baseline. That'll be good enough. And if he can make a game-winning 50-yard field goal inside or inside Razorback Stadium, moving forward this season, I think that would be dream-worthy stuff for all the Arkansas fans out there. But yeah, that's a good point. The kickers feel like less of a concern than they were entering camp, but of course we haven't really seen any field goals take place, so this is all word of mouth from Mr. Sam Pittman. All right, I think we can wrap up there. We will be back next week. I think we'll start trying to do this a little more regularly, where we get back to our weekly grind, and then when the football season arrives, you can expect every Monday again with us having a podcast. So thank you so much for listening. Hope everyone enjoys the last of August and the final few weeks until football season. I think Hutch and I are very, very glad that it's almost here, and even more looking forward to getting to cover games instead of fall practices. So, Hutch, thanks for joining me, man. I will see you tomorrow.